Is this the best you have? The question, thick with a German accent, dripped with condescension. It echoed across the concrete and manicured grass of the Fort Bragg long-distance firing range. Klaus, a man whose youth was outmatched only by his arrogance, smirked at his partner Richter. They were part of a visiting German KSK sniper team, engaged in a joint training exercise, and they were thoroughly unimpressed. Their target was not a paper silhouette or a steel plate, but an old man. Dennis Randall, 82 years old, sat on a simple wooden stool, his back straight, his breathing even. He didn't seem to hear them. His attention was on the rifle resting across his lap, a weapon that looked ancient next to the matte black polymer and carbon fiber marvels flanking him. It was a bolt action, its wooden stock worn smooth and dark in places from the grip of hands long past, its blued steel faded to a soft gray. "Look at that relic," Richter whispered, loud enough for the small crowd of off-duty soldiers and range staff to hear. "It belongs in a museum, not on a 1,000-meter line. Perhaps with him." Dennis ran a cloth, soft with age, along the barrel. His hands, though wrinkled and mapped with the veins of a long life, were steady. He moved with a slow, deliberate economy that spoke not of weakness but of a profound and settled patience. The range officer, a young lieutenant named Hayes, shifted uncomfortably. He was caught between placating his high-profile international guests and the quiet dignity of the old man who was a fixture at this range. A local who came every Tuesday, fired 5 rounds, cleaned his weapon, and left. "Gentlemen, let's maintain professional decorum," Hayes said, but his voice lacked conviction. The Germans were celebrated marksmen, the best of the best. The old man was just an old man. Klaus stepped closer, peering down at Dennis. "Old man, do you need help? Perhaps your eyes are not so good, yeah? This is a serious range. For serious soldiers." He gestured to his own rifle, a piece of advanced German engineering that cost more than a new car. "This is a tool of precision. What you have there is a piece of firewood." Dennis finally looked up. His eyes were a pale, washed-out blue, but they held a clarity that was unnerving. They weren't angry. They weren't offended. They were simply observant, taking in the young sniper's posture, his expensive watch, the casual cruelty in his smile. He said nothing. The silence was more infuriating to Klaus than any retort could have been. He felt the need to fill it, to assert the dominance he felt was his right. "I will make a wager," he announced to the onlookers. "I will hit the hostage-taker target at 1,100 meters. A headshot, through the eye." He puffed out his chest. "If I do it, the old man packs up his toy and never returns. If I miss," he laughed, "I will not miss." Richter joined in. "And if he can even hit the target, just the steel plate, from that distance with that thing," he said, flicking a dismissive finger toward Dennis's rifle, "we will clean every weapon on this line." The challenge hung in the air, sharp and ugly. The small crowd murmured. It was a setup, a public humiliation. The hostage-taker target was a specialized reactive plate, the head of the hostile silhouette barely the size of an orange. Hitting it at that range was a feat for a world-class sniper with a state-of-the-art rifle and a spotter. For an old man with an antique firearm and no spotter, it was an impossibility. Lieutenant Hayes looked at Dennis, his expression a mixture of pity and impatience. "Sir, maybe it's best if you just call it a day. These gentlemen are our guests." Dennis slowly, methodically finished wiping down his rifle. He laid the cloth aside, his movements unhurried. The German snipers exchanged a look of triumphant mockery. They had won. The old man was going to retreat, to shuffle away in quiet defeat. But Dennis didn't pack up. He picked up a single cartridge from a small, worn leather pouch. The brass was tarnished with age. He slid it into the breech, the click of the bolt closing echoing in the tense quiet. He then looked at Lieutenant Hayes, his pale blue eyes holding the young officer's gaze. "I've been waiting for the wind to settle," Dennis said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. It was the first time he had spoken. "It's almost there." The sheer, unadulterated confidence in his tone shifted the atmosphere. It wasn't boastful. It was a simple statement of fact, like a farmer commenting on the weather. Klaus's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. This wasn't the reaction he expected. He expected fear, embarrassment, retreat. He didn't expect readiness. "The wind?" Richter scoffed, recovering his composure. "What do you know of the wind, old man?" "My Kestrel 5700 gives me a precise reading. A 1.2 mil hold for windage, 8.8 mils for elevation. Do you even know what that means?" Dennis didn't answer. He was running a thumb over the stock of his rifle, over a set of initials roughly carved into the wood, LTB. The pressure from Klaus and Richter intensified. They saw his hesitation not as patience but as a sign of his senility or fear. So you will not shoot? You are afraid to be shown up? Klaus goaded, his voice rising. This is a place for warriors, not for grandfathers telling stories. He turned to the other soldiers watching. In my country we respect our elders, but we also expect them to know their place. His place is not here. The insult was direct, a deliberate attempt to strip Dennis of his dignity. The onlookers shifted, their amusement turning to discomfort. A line had been crossed. The sport was gone, replaced by a kind of predatory bullying. "Lieutenant," Richter said, his tone sharp and official. "This man is a civilian. He is not part of this exercise. He is becoming a distraction and frankly a safety concern. His equipment is not up to standard. I must insist you remove him from the firing line." Hayes, out of his depth and intimidated, nodded reluctantly. "Sir, I have to ask you to leave the line. You can't fire today." He took a step toward Dennis, his hand outstretched as if to take the rifle. "Please, sir, don't make this difficult." Dennis's thumb stopped moving over the initials on the stock. His gaze became distant for a fleeting second, the bright sun-bleached range dissolving into a thick triple canopy jungle, choking with humidity and the smell of rot and fear. He's a boy, barely 20, handing the rifle to a much younger Dennis. The initials are freshly carved, the wood pale. "Take care of her, Denny." The boy, LTB. Larry Thomas Bell says, his voice strained. "She's a straight shooter." Gunfire rattles in the distance, a sound that has become the constant percussion of their lives. "When we get out of this hellhole, I'm gonna buy a farm," Larry says, a desperate hope in his eyes. Dennis just nods, his own fear a cold knot in his stomach. The rifle feels heavy in his hands, not just with its own weight but with the weight of the promise to bring it, and its owner, home. The memory was gone as quickly as it came, a flash of lightning in the placid sky of the present. Dennis's eyes refocused on Lieutenant Hayes's outstretched hand. He didn't move, he didn't yield. He simply sat there, a granite boulder against which the waves of their arrogance and impatience crashed and broke. On the far edge of the gathering crowd, a young specialist, a kid named Garcia, had seen enough. He'd been watching the whole thing unfold, his jaw tightening with every insult. He knew Dennis. The old man never bothered anyone. He'd even given Garcia a few pointers a month back, simple advice about breathing and trigger squeeze that had tightened his groupings more than a week of formal instruction. Disrespecting an old man was one thing. Disrespecting a fellow shooter, a man who clearly knew his way around a rifle, was another. But disrespecting this old man felt like a sacrilege. Garcia slipped his phone from his pocket, keeping it low. He stepped back, away from the firing line, his fingers flying across the screen. He pulled up a number from his contacts, a number he was only supposed to use in a dire emergency. He looked back at the scene, the Germans posturing, the lieutenant faltering, and Dennis still and silent, enduring the humiliation. This felt like an emergency. He pressed the call button and lifted the phone to his ear. "Operations desk, Sergeant Miller," a crisp voice answered. "Sergeant, this is Specialist Garcia at the long-distance range," he said, his voice low and urgent. "You need to get someone down here, right now." "What's the situation, Specialist? Is there an injury?" "No, Sergeant," Garcia said, turning his back to the confrontation to shield his words. They're disrespecting a civilian. Some visiting KSK guys are giving an old-timer a hard time." There was a pause on the other end, followed by an audible sigh of annoyance. "Garcia, this line is for operational emergencies, not for settling range squabbles. Tell the RSO to handle it." "He can't. He's letting them walk all over him," Garcia insisted, his voice rising in frustration. "Listen, Sergeant, the man they're harassing, it's Mr. Randall, Dennis Randall." The silence on the other end of the line was different this time. It wasn't annoyance, it was a sharp, sudden intake of breath. The air itself seemed to go still. "Say that name again, Specialist," Sergeant Miller said, his voice stripped of all previous boredom, now flat and cold as steel. "Randall," Garcia repeated. "Dennis Randall." The phone line was quiet for 3 full seconds. Garcia could hear the faint, frantic clicking of a keyboard in the background. Then, Miller's voice came back, and it was a completely different voice. It was tight, controlled, and ringing with an alarm that sent a shiver down Garcia's spine. "Specialist Garcia, what is your exact location?" "Range 7, sir. The 1,000-meter line. Do not engage, do not interfere," Miller commanded. "Keep your eyes on Mr. Randall. Maintain this line. Do not hang up. I am handing this upstairs, right now." Garcia didn't have to ask who upstairs was. He could already hear muffled but urgent shouting in the background on Miller's end. Inside the windowless concrete confines of the Joint Special Operations Command Complex, a world away from the sunlit range, Colonel Marcus Thorne was ending a video conference with the Pentagon when his operations sergeant burst into the room without knocking, an act so contrary to protocol it made Thorne's blood run cold. "Sir, we have a Spectre 1 situation." Thorne was out of his chair before the sergeant finished the sentence. The name was a ghost, a legend whispered in hushed tones in the unit's private history. It wasn't a call sign currently in use. It was an original designation from the very founding of the unit before it was even officially named Delta. There was only one man who had ever held that call sign and was still alive. "Where?" Thorne demanded, his voice a low growl. "Range 7, sir," civilian sighed. "He's in a confrontation with the visiting KSK team." Thorne swore, a single sharp syllable. He grabbed the red phone on his desk, the direct line to the base commander. "Get me General Peters. I don't care if he's in a meeting with God. Get him now, and scramble the QRF team. Now, Sergeant. Tell them it's a Spectre 1 authorization. Full kit. Go." The sergeant disappeared as Thorne listened to the phone connect. The general's aide answered, "This is Colonel Thorne. I am executing a command override. I need a full lockdown on all access roads to Range 7. Nothing in or out until my team arrives, and get the German liaison officer on the line. Tell him his men are in the process of committing a career-ending international incident." He didn't wait for a reply. He slammed the phone down and was already moving, grabbing his own sidearm and heading for the door. The entire command center, a place that ran on quiet, deadly efficiency, was now a hive of controlled chaos, all because of one name, Dennis Randall. Back at Range 7, Klaus and Richter were enjoying their victory. Dennis hadn't moved. Lieutenant Hayes was about to physically escort him away. "Sir, for the last time you need to leave," Hayes said, his voice strained with the effort of trying to be authoritative. "Take your shot, old man," Klaus said with a final magnanimous gesture of mockery. "Show us what you have before you go. Show us the great skill of the American grandfather." He turned and winked at Richter. This was the final turn of the screw, the ultimate humiliation, forcing him to fail in front of everyone before being thrown out. He was relishing the moment, this peak of his power trip. He was an elite sniper of the KSK, and he was putting a doddering old fool in his place. He was certain this was the wisest, most correct course of action. He had never been more wrong in his life. The first sound was a distant siren, which was odd. There was no emergency. Then another joined it. Then over the rise of the dirt access road, a cloud of dust billowed. It wasn't a single vehicle, it was a convoy. 3 black, up-armored Chevrolet Suburbans, moving at a speed that was both reckless and perfectly controlled. They didn't slow as they approached the range. They fanned out in a practiced, aggressive formation, coming to a hard stop that sent gravel skittering across the pavement. The doors flew open simultaneously. Men poured out. They were not in standard army uniforms. They were clad in tactical gear, their faces grim, their weapons held at a low ready. They moved with a fluid, predatory grace that made every other soldier on the range look like a clumsy amateur. Delta Force, the unit. The air crackled with their sudden, overwhelming presence. The entire range fell dead silent. The German snipers froze, their mouths slightly agape. Lieutenant Hayes looked as if he'd seen a ghost. A man in a crisp uniform, a full bird colonel on his collar, emerged from the lead vehicle. He was tall, imposing, with eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He strode onto the range, his boots crunching on the gravel, his gaze fixed, sweeping past the Germans, past the lieutenant, past everyone, until it landed on the old man sitting on the stool. Colonel Thorne walked directly to Dennis Randall. He stopped 3 feet in front of him, his posture ramrod straight. In the stunned silence, he brought his hand up in a salute so sharp, so precise it seemed to cut the air. "Spectre 1, the colonel said, his voice clear and ringing with a profound respect that bordered on reverence. "Sir, Colonel Thorne, we were informed there was a disturbance." Dennis looked up at him and gave a slow, tired nod. "Just some boys being boys, Marcus. A little loud is all." Thorne held the salute for a moment longer before dropping his hand. He turned, and his gaze, now arctic cold, fell upon Klaus and Richter. They flinched as if physically struck. "You are the KSK liaison team?" Thorne asked. It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. Richter managed to stammer, "Yeah, yes, Colonel." Thorne took a slow step towards them. His men fanned out, silent sentinels creating a perimeter. "Then you will stand here and you will listen," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You stand on the soil of the United States Army, as our guests, and on this soil you have chosen to publicly mock a living legend and a founding father of modern special operations." He pointed a finger at Dennis. "This is Dennis Randall, call sign Spectre 1. One of the first 7 men recruited into the organization that you now know as 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. He served in 3 wars, 2 of which you will never read about in any history book. He has more confirmed long-range engagements than your entire unit combined. The rifle you so casually dismissed as firewood was used on a mission in 1968 to eliminate 3 high-value targets at over 1,200 yards in a monsoon with no spotter. That action saved an entire Green Beret A-team from being overrun, an action for which he was awarded a Distinguished Service Cross that he keeps in a shoebox somewhere in his closet. The crowd was utterly silent, every person hanging on every word. Specialist Garcia, still on the phone, felt a wave of vindication so powerful it almost buckled his knees. Lieutenant Hayes's face had gone from pale to chalk white. Klaus and Richter looked like they were about to be physically ill. Their arrogance had evaporated, replaced by a dawning, sickening horror. They weren't mocking some random old man. They were mocking the origin of their own craft. The techniques your instructors teach you, Thorne continued, his voice relentless. The formulas for windage and elevation, the very theory of coordinated sniper-spotter teams, he helped write those manuals. He tested those theories with his own blood and sweat in places that don't exist on any map. He has forgotten more about marksmanship than you will ever have the privilege to learn. You are not fit to carry his ammunition, let alone speak to him. Thorne finally stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the weight of history and shame. The colonel turned back to Dennis, his entire demeanor softening. "Sir," he said, "the range is yours. Is there anything you require?" Dennis looked down at the single cartridge he had loaded into his rifle. Then he looked up, past the Germans, past the targets, to the distant horizon. "No, Marcus, I think I'm ready for my shot now." Colonel Thorne turned to the cowering Lieutenant Hayes. "Range officer, is this man's shot authorized?" Hayes, snapping out of his stupor, practically shouted, "Yes, sir. The line is clear. The line is hot. Mr. Randall is authorized to fire." The colonel then turned to the German snipers. His voice was no longer angry. It was worse. It was disappointed. "Respect," he said, "is not a function of age or equipment. It is a function of character. It is the currency of a true warrior. Today you have proven yourselves bankrupt." He gestured for 2 of his men to escort them to their commanding officer, who was no doubt sprinting toward the range at that very moment. As they were being led away, their faces a mask of utter humiliation, Dennis finally spoke, not to them but to the air itself, a lesson for anyone who cared to listen. "Pride is a poor spotter," he said, his voice quiet yet carrying across the silent range. "It will make you miss the target every time." He then settled himself behind the rifle, the worn wooden stock fitting into his shoulder like a long-lost part of him. As he looked through the old simple scope, his mind flashed back one last time, not to the jungle, but to the day the initials were carved. Larry Thomas Bell wasn't dead. He was on a stretcher, pale and bleeding, one leg gone below the knee. But he was alive. He was going home. "You keep it, Denny," he'd whispered, pressing the rifle into Dennis's hands. "You're better with it than I ever was. Make it count." It wasn't a gift. It was a transfer of responsibility, a passing of a torch. Make it count. And he had. For 50 years he had. Dennis took a slow breath, held it, and the world narrowed to the small circle of his scope and the impossibly distant target. The crosshairs settled. There was no tremor, no hesitation. There was only a lifetime of practice, of discipline, of promises kept. He gently squeezed the trigger. The crack of the old rifle was sharp, distinct from the thunderous boom of the modern sniper systems. It was the sound of history speaking. For a second, nothing happened. Then 1,100 meters away, the tiny orange circle representing the hostile's head vanished, and the high-pitched ping of lead hitting hardened steel echoed back across the range, a perfect final punctuation mark. In the weeks that followed, the incident at Range 7 became a quiet legend on the base. The 2 KSK snipers were sent home, their tour cut short. A formal top-level apology was delivered from the German Ministry of Defense. General Peters himself issued a new base-wide mandate, a mandatory training block for all incoming personnel, titled the Randall Rule, focusing on the legacy and respectful treatment of military veterans, regardless of their age or apparent status. Lieutenant Hayes was reassigned to a desk job in logistics, a quiet but unmistakable end to his command aspirations. One rainy Tuesday morning, about a month later, Dennis was sitting in a small off-base diner, nursing a cup of coffee. The bell over the door chimed, and in walked Richter, the younger of the 2 German snipers. He was in civilian clothes, looking tired and much younger without his uniform. He saw Dennis, hesitated, then walked slowly to the table. He stood there for a moment, shifting his weight, clearly struggling for words. Finally, he just said, "Mr. Randall." Dennis looked up from his coffee and nodded. "Son, I was not sent here," Richter said, his English careful and formal. My flight home is tomorrow. I wish to apologize. For my conduct, there is no excuse. It was arrogant, and it was shameful. He looked down at his feet. What Colonel Thorne said, we had no idea. That's the point, Dennis said, his voice gentle. You're not supposed to have an idea. You're just supposed to have respect. Richter met his gaze, and for the first time Dennis saw not a soldier but a young man who had learned a hard, painful lesson. Yes, sir. I understand that now. He stood in silence for another moment, then placed a small, folded piece of paper on the table. I researched the name on your rifle, Larry Thomas Bell. I read about his service after he was wounded. He became a teacher. He passed away 2 years ago. Dennis looked at the paper, then back at the young man. He gave a slow, sad smile. He was a good man, better than me. Thank you for the lesson, Mr. Randall, Richter said. He gave a slight, formal bow, turned and walked out of the diner, back into the rain. Dennis watched him go, then picked up his coffee cup, his steady hands a testament to a life of quiet, unassuming valor. If you were moved by Dennis Randall's story, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Veteran Valor for more tales of heroes who walk among us. Share this story to remind others that legends don't always wear a uniform.